Hi, my name's Jared and welcome to my Tone Wars channel. Now, on my channel, I do gear reviews and tutorials and shootouts. I normally do not do album reviews, but I'm going to make an exception for this particular album that just got released by my favorite band, Dream Theater, for a couple of reasons. Number one, I'm a huge Dream Theater fan, and I've been a Dream Theater fan for at least 25 years. And number two, I'm obviously a huge John Petrucci fan. I own 4 of his guitars. This is one of them, and it was actually signed by him at a concert that I saw him at in Ohio a couple years ago. I own several of his signature guitars and love them. So if you've watched my channel for a while, you've seen my whole collection by now, I'm sure. Number 3, I'm pretty sure that if you watch my channel, you're a guitar player, which also means that you probably know who John Petrucci is, which means you probably know who Dream Theater is. So I figured that I should do a review for you guys. And if you've lost touch with Dream Theater over the years for whatever reason, here's a really good reason to come back to Dream Theater because as far as I'm concerned, this is one of the best albums they've released in several years. Well, as I said, I do a lot of gear reviews on this channel and I always have a guitar on me. So I feel weird talking without a guitar on me. So that's why I'm doing it. I'm not trying to be a weirdo or anything like that. It's just this is how I'm comfortable being in front of the camera. So anyways, well, let's get on with the review. Okay, so there's several topics I'm going to talk about on this album, and the first one is going to be the overall spirit of the album. Well, to me, the spirit of the album pretty much sounds like 5 guys that have been in a band for a long time together got away from some really much needed bro time so they could get reconnected both musically and on personal levels as well. And it sounds like it really did have a really good impact on them and the music because if you ask me, I can hear the joy and the life just pouring out of all of these songs. And I haven't heard that in a while from them. Now, don't get me wrong, I do love all of their albums very much, but this one's special for some reason. I mean, most of the time the albums are kind of like a grower. You know, you have to kind of get used to it and you have to kind of marinate in it for a while and stuff starts popping out at you and then you pick your favorite songs and your favorite moments and you really start kind of loving the album more and more as you listen to it. But this particular album, right away, I loved everything. It just had this great spirit about it, and it was very enjoyable. And I guess if I could sum this album up with one word, that would be the word I would use. I would just say that overall, it's very enjoyable. Like I said before, I can hear like the new life in the band. It sounds like they all got a new lease on life, and the band itself, musically and technically, got a whole new lease on life as well. It's like their careers just got refired, and it's just amazing. It's like these guys got a whole new appreciation for each other, their music, their talent, their gear, and it's actually really cool to feel that when you listen to these songs. It's just gushing out of the songs. I mean, in this particular album, there's a certain amount of recklessness that I'm not used to hearing, and it's the first time I've heard it, especially when you compare it to all of their other offerings in the past. I mean, the way John's playing in some of his solos now, he's really adapting to some really cool riffs and some kind of more of a fun approach to guitar playing. And he's kind of put some of the technical stuff aside at times just to have some fun. And it was really cool to hear him do that. And it seems like the whole band has kind of done that. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the overall production of the album. I think that they have reached a whole new level production-wise on this album. I think that it sounds huge. It's got a really nice, wide, kind of a live sound to it. As opposed to some of their other albums that sounded really good, but they just sounded a little narrow and focused, especially when you compare them to this one. This kind of reminds me of one of their concert DVDs. I mean, yeah, there's some polish to it and everything, but it's not overly polished. There's a lot of rawness to it and a really lively kind of feel to the whole thing, and I really like it a lot. It's kind of ambient in some ways, more than I've heard in their other albums. I don't know, I just think that there's a lot more life to this album. I don't know if it's just the production itself, or it's the writing, or maybe it's just everything, but there's definitely not such a overly focused sound and feel to this album. It just sounds very big and bombastic. and wide, and it almost sounds a little bit reckless, but in a good way. I really love the rebellious kind of feel that you get in the production of this album. Again, it's not overly polished and it's not overly loose either. They found a really good sweet spot in between there, and it just feels really good and organic as well. It's very full and punchy, and I really love the fact that you can hear all of the instruments very well, and they all are mixed and blended perfectly with each other, and I'm never really straining to hear anything. It all sounds very balanced, and it's amazing how they could get it to sound that good with that many instruments going on and that many tracks going on all at once. And everybody's instrument sounds huge at the same time. And you got to fit all that in such a small space on a recording. And the guy that mixed this is a genius. And I hope that they stick with him for a long time because I really love how bombastic it is. Okay, so now briefly I'm going to talk about the overall performances of the members. I really found that James LaBrie has never sounded better. I mean, I really like his voice on this album a lot. And I know there's subjectivity to singers' voices, but this is the best he sounded in a long time. I always think that he does a great job on all the albums, but there's just something special about his voice on this one. I think he really found some new purpose or some new fuel or something, because there's just something really driving him in this album, and he just sounds really good. Like I said before, it just seems like all of them are found another cylinder to fire on and added it to their engine. I mean, it's really cool. And what's cool too is he's staying really well within his range, and he's not overexerting himself. It's very pleasant sounding, and I don't hear him straining his voice at all in the album. It sounds almost effortless. So I really think he did a great job on this. And all the vocal harmonies that he sang sound really good too, and they're very silky and very smooth, and I think they're all performed very well. And he really captured the spirit and the emotion of the songs very well. I don't really think they could be sung any better. Now, as far as the keyboards go, I mean, it was really nice hearing Jordan kind of take more of a supportive role in a lot of the songs too, and he really added a lot of size and really nice soundscapes to all of the music, and he really themed it up really well. And a lot of the piano playing was very tastefully done, and it wasn't too overly notey, you know. I mean, he pulled back a lot and just made it very melodic and gave it this really nice classic kind of vibe to a lot of the piano runs that he was doing, and I really like that a lot. And I'm glad that he brought the organ back too, because I always like a good fat organ in the songs. It always gives it a really nice classic feel and adds a little bit of a dark kind of bluesy and I don't know, just kind of a classic rock kind of feel to some of the songs. And it was really cool to have that throwback sound in there. Now, as always, Jordan's solos were very good, and I liked all of them very much, and they fit the music, and even as a guitar player, I enjoyed them. They weren't like a commercial break for me. I still get into his solos a lot, and these are some of the best ones that he's played so far, in my opinion. And John Myung played like a freaking beast on this one. Yeah, I like the fact that he actually got to start a song too, and you could hear him just laying down this really nice groove for the band to kind of come in behind him on. It was really cool where he could come in with his bass and set the tone for a song and use it for an intro. Not a lot of bands do that, and I love the fact that he's so good that he's able to do that and make it enjoyable for everyone. And it sounds like Mangini really found a comfortable spot as a drummer and as a person in the band, and he really feels at home there. I mean, he's more in the pocket than I've ever heard him with this band. I mean, there's a more of a carefree but still tight and supportive kind of role that he's playing with his drumming, and it really shows in this album. I mean, he's very much in the pocket, but there's this really nice kind of carefree, laid-back feel to his playing on this album that I haven't heard him do before. I mean, there's some really killer fills and intros and crazy beats that he's doing, but there's this really cool kind of fun factor that I'm hearing in his playing that I haven't heard as much on the previous albums, but on this one, it really stands out big time. And last but not least, we're going to talk about the Trooch. Man, I got to tell you, I love John Petrucci. He's my favorite guitar player of all time, and he always will be. And on this album, I just heard a completely different side of him come out. There's just this reckless kind of feel to a lot of his solos that I've been really wanting him to do, and it sounds like he's really kind of turned it loose in some of the songs. He's kind of getting some old school kind of blues riffs and in some areas, and you can just hear like when he's playing, like there's this kind of fun kind of thing going on with him too, just like I was saying with Mangini. He's just having a good time. He's just going in there and just freaking tearing it up and just going for it. And it just sounds so cool for him to just get kind of reckless. It's almost like he had a couple shots of bourbon and plugged his guitar in and was just like, this is kind of what I'm feeling on this song right now. And he just starts tearing it up, and they were like, we recorded that and we're just going to keep it. That was a good take. That was it, you know. And the other thing that I wanted to point out is how melodic he was on a lot of the solos too. I mean, he does the classic Petrucci thing. He's got all these killer runs, but he also has all these really sweet melody lines, and he ties them together with all these really badass runs. And some of the runs that he did in there were like, I mean, I literally had to rewind it and hear it again several times because they were so killer and they were so fast and so beefy sounding. I just couldn't believe what I was hearing sometimes. I mean, I know he's Petrucci, and it's like, well, yeah, duh. I mean, the guy's fast and he could play anything. But some of these were just so fluid. I mean, it was the notes just kind of melted together. It was crazy. I had to rewind it, like I said, several times just to hear what the hell he did. And I'm just super stoked about all the solos on this album. Every single one of them is absolutely amazing. I mean, they're melodic, they're crazy, they're bluesy, they're reckless, they're fun, they're technical. I mean, there's all kinds of crazy stuff going on there. And I really think that he's found a whole new level of writing, playing, and just kind of letting some stuff go and not worrying about maybe certain things about, oh, I got to be technical or whatever. There's just times he just goes in there and just plays some killer stuff and doesn't care how technical it is or whatever. He's just going in and just playing from his soul, and just it's just coming out. And there's this, like I said, like this reckless abandon happening in some of these, and it's just so nice to hear him just let loose. And I really enjoy every solo on this album. I mean, yes, there's still a lot of technical stuff, but man, some of that just go for it type stuff is in there, and it's just awesome to hear. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the sounds of the instruments on this album. And I'm going to start with Labrie. Like I said before, I think this is one of his best albums in a long time. He sounds fantastic. I love the effects they have on his voice. I love how big it sounds. I love how smooth it sounds and how glassy it sounds. He hits the notes effortlessly, and again, I don't hear a lot of strain in his voice. And I just love how they have them mixed in there. You can hear them perfectly, but it doesn't sound too loud. It's not drowning out other instruments. It just sounds like it's set in the mix perfectly. I love the effects that they used on it. It sounds really big where it's supposed to and more focused where it's supposed to sound focused. And they use some other effects on his voice too that sound more modern. It's something that a lot of bands are doing nowadays. So it's keeping up with the times, and it just sounds very current. And they really couldn't have done a better job with recording his vocals. The harmonies sound very full, but there's this nice airiness to them, so they don't sound overly layered or thickened or anything like that. It's just this really nice kind of, I don't know, I guess airy is the word I'm looking for. It's just the way that they're feathered into the mix. It's just perfect. The keyboards have this really nice supportive kind of mix to them in this album. There's a lot of stuff that Jordan's doing that sounds like a guitar that's making John's guitar sound different and fatter and darker or fuller in certain spots, and you don't really realize what's going on there, but that's Jordan actually playing stuff along with John to give it that cool coloring to his guitar tone, and I really like how he did that. The piano sounds really good. It's got this really nice classic tone to it. And I love the fact that he's brought the organ back, and I love how he utilized it in the music, and it sounds really good. Jordan's lead sounds are pretty much what he's used for most of the albums, and we're all pretty familiar with them, and they still sound great. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? I really love the way he utilized the string sounds in this album. it really added a lot of width and size to the songs. And it was really cool how he was easily able to manipulate the mood of the different parts of the songs with his string sounds. Now, on this album, John Myung's bass is heard better than it is on any other album. In some of the interviews that I saw in the making of this album, they were explaining that one of their goals was they wanted to make sure that you could hear it no matter what you were listening to it on, even a phone speaker. And they actually accomplished that goal because I checked it out on my phone speaker and I could still hear his bass guitar on that, which is very unusual. Normally you can't hear that. And I'm so glad that we can finally hear his bass guitar the way that it deserves to be heard. I know that they've worked on that more and more, especially on the last few albums, to make sure that you could hear his bass guitar better. But this is the first time I was actually really able to hear it big time without it interrupting the other instruments in the mix. And they really couldn't have done a better job with it. Like I said, it sounds incredible, and I love the fact that I can hear it no matter what device I'm using to listen to the mix on. Okay, let's talk about the drum sound. This is simply the best drum sound Mike Mangini's had since he's joined the band. I mean, I really hate to say it, but I wasn't a big fan of Mangini's drum sound on previous albums. 2 reasons, and mainly the issue was with the kick and the snare. I mean, the kick always sounded really thin and kind of ticky. It had this really small, kind of attacky kind of sound to it, and it just didn't have any bottom end or fullness to it. It just didn't jive with the music. It just didn't give the music the punch that it needed. And his snare always had this kind of weird sound to it, and especially on the self-titled album, it had a mushy sound to it. And I don't know what was going on with that, but there was just something about it that just wasn't jiving with me. And I mean no disrespect to him at all. I've met him. He's actually a really nice guy. So I hate to say this about his drum sound, but it was just something was off about the kick and the snare. The rest of the drums and the brass sounded amazing. It was just those 2 drums that just had major issues with me, and I don't really think I'm the only one. Other people that I talked to that listened to the albums said the same thing. They were like, yeah, the drums just sound really thin. But on this album, they sound amazing. There's this really good like liveliness to them, and the kick and snare sound perfect. There's a lot of fullness to the kick drums. They sound very natural. They have just enough attack on them to cut through the mix, but there's this really good punch to them. And the snare sounds amazing. It's kind of like a chalkiness to it, but there's a really nice low end and a nice smooth top end to it, and it cuts through the mix just right. So this is the first time I could say that I've enjoyed every single drum on his kit, including the brass, kick, snare, toms, everything. And it's a very balanced approach. Like I said, on other albums, all the drums and the brass sounded amazing except for the kick and the snare. Now the kick and the snare are up to the level of the other drums, and it's perfectly balanced. And I hope they stay with that sound because this is the best he's ever sounded. All right, so now we're going to talk about the guitar tone, my favorite part. What John's accomplished sonically on this album is something that I've been hoping that he would do for a long time, especially since they've been releasing a lot of live DVDs. And I really love how his guitar sounded live on all of those DVDs. It sounded amazing. It had this really nice, dark, kind of glassy tone to it. But when you listen to the album version of those songs, his guitar sounded kind of dull in comparison. They didn't sound bad, but I'm just saying in comparison to the live shows, they just didn't have that dark kind of glassy edge to them that I love so much. On this album, he definitely accomplished that. I hear exactly what I heard in the live DVDs that I watched of Dream Theater on this album, and he captured it perfectly. This is the best guitar sound that he's ever had on a recording. I mean, there's this really nice kind of scary, glassy darkness to the guitar tones. When he hits a lot of the lower chords, it just sounds like just giant guitar bombs dropping on you. And there's just this really nice fullness and aggression that you can hear in his guitar tone. And it really enhances a lot of the parts where he plays like that. And the single notes, everything's very, very articulate. And there's this really nice kind of bark to it when he's hitting the lower strings. And the solos sound absolutely amazing. There's this really nice kind of glassiness to them. I know I'm using that word a lot, but that's the only word I could think of. It's just like this nice, dark, glassy kind of sound, but they still have enough cut to cut through the mix just right. But there's nothing like, hurting my ears or anything. And John's always very conscious of that. He always wants people to enjoy the tones and not hide from them. And that's something that he really takes a lot of pride in. And I could tell that he put a lot of care into this album and the way the guitars sound. What I really like too is when he's doing runs, if you'll notice on the lower notes when he's kind of doing like a long run, the lower notes just have this really nice kind of fullness to them, and there's just like this extra little bit of hair on the notes, and it just sounds amazing. And when he gets up to the higher strings, I mean, there's just this really crisp kind of very smooth tone to them, but like I said, there's just like this dark glassiness to them. I know I keep using that phrase, and I hope I'm not driving you nuts with it, but it just sounds amazing, and he couldn't have really dialed in his amp tone any better on this album. And I honestly think that based on the guitar tone that I'm hearing on this album, his signature amplifier is probably flying off of shelves right now because everyone wants to chase that tone down. Now, I've seen some interviews with John Petrucci talking about his guitar tone on this album, and they were asking him what he would compare it to, and he's talked before about it being compared to chocolate cake or Five Guys burgers, and he said on this one he went full T-Rex. Well, I think what happened on this album was before he went full T-Rex, he fed it a bunch of Five Guys burgers and chocolate cake. I know the sign says do not feed the T-Rex, but as far as I'm concerned, John, you can feed the T-Rex anytime if this is the result of that. Well, I hope you enjoyed this review of Dream Theater's new album, Distance Over Time. And if you've never heard Dream Theater, or if you haven't listened to them in a while, this is definitely the album to listen to get you hooked in. Most of their albums are growers. This is the first one where you can listen to it and you like it right away, and it still does stick with you. I've listened to it every day for the last 4 days, and I love it. And there's still new things that I'm discovering that I like about each song every time I listen to it. To all my subscribers, I appreciate you very much. And if you haven't subscribed, please do. And if this is your first time here, once again, I don't just do album reviews. I do music gear reviews, I do shootouts, and I do tutorials. So check out some of my other videos, and if you like what you see, please subscribe. Well, I got a lot of great stuff coming up, and I'll see you on the next one.